Stop. Don't touch that cake. Stephanie's voice cracked through the entire hall like a whip. Every single guest froze. Forks midair. Everyone suddenly got silent at her shout. The little girl stood in front of the birthday table, both arms stretched wide, her eyes locked on her father. Dad. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. That cake is poisoned, she said in a certain voice. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs filled the room. Mark, her father, stood at the head of the table, his eyes staring at his 4-year-old daughter, to the beautifully decorated cake, then to Sandra, who was standing just 2 steps away. Stephen stepped beside his twin sister immediately. We know what she did, Dad. We saw everything. Sandra let out a soft laugh, walked up to Mark and touched his arm. Sweetheart, they're 4 years old. This is just another one of their little tantrums. But Stephanie didn't flinch. She stared at Sandra without blinking, without wavering, without a single shadow of doubt. Mark exhaled slowly. Stephanie. I'm not lying, Dad, she said quickly. Stephanie. Mark called out angrily. Be mindful of your words, he warned sternly. To understand how this moment was even possible, let's go back to where it all started. Mark Sia was a kind, loving man, filled with warmth and extremely rich and powerful. But the night his wife, Nara, died on that hospital bed, 31 hours into labor, her hands still warm when the nurses finally pulled him away, that night he died alongside with his wife. He walked out of that hospital with 2 newborns in his arms, and had no idea what to do with either of them. That was when Cassie came to his rescue. She needed a job to earn a living, and Mark needed help to take care of his little twins. But from the very first morning Cassie stepped into that house on her resumption of work, picked up baby Stephanie, who hadn't stopped crying for 6 hours straight, and held her against her chest, humming a song so soft the little baby Stephanie stopped crying. Even Mark, who watched from the doorway and said nothing. Cassie was 26, warm-eyed, filled with kindness. By the time Stephanie and Stephen were 3 months old, they knew her smell, her voice, the exact weight of her arms. By the time they were 2, they reached for her first thing every morning. By 4, they called her Cass. And the way they said it carried more tenderness. Hello, once again you're welcome to my humble channel. And please, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to click the plus sign and give the story a like. I would like to ask you this question. What would you do if your dad suddenly brings in another woman and is like, hello kids, this is the woman I want to get married to? How are you going to react? I want to hear your response in the comments section. Now let's get back to the story, because I don't want to keep you waiting. What Mark never fully understood about his children was this. They weren't ordinary. They never had been. It started small, Stephanie finishing sentences before people spoke them. Stephen knowing when someone was upset before a single word was said. Mark assumed it was twin intuition. Something biological. Cute even. The twins could read minds. Not in flashes or fragments, in full, clean, unfiltered thoughts. Every feeling a person tried to hide, they heard it the way other children heard music, clearly, completely, without effort. And Cassie's mind? To them, it was the safest place in the world. No hidden anger. No resentment. No agenda. Just warmth and love so consistent it felt like breathing in a breath of freshness in the early hours of the morning. That was why they chose her. That was why no one else could be compared to her. Then Sandra arrived, and everything in that house changed for the worse. Mark introduced her one evening. He sat the twins down in the living room, his voice careful. I want you both to meet someone very important to me. Sandra walked in wearing a fitted peach color gown with a wide smile, her hand already extended towards Stephanie. Hi, sweetheart. I've heard so much about you. Stephanie looked at Sandra's outstretched hand, then looked up at her face, then stepped back away from her. The smile on Sandra's face didn't waver, but her thought did. And Stephanie heard it, sharp and clear as a slap. These kids are going to be a problem. Sandra whispered in her thoughts. Stephen moved closer to his sister without a word. They stood together, a united wall of 2 4-year-olds, and the air between them and Sandra went cold. Stephanie. Mark's voice carried a warning. Say hello to her. She's not nice, Dad. Stephanie's voice was blunt. She doesn't mean what she's saying. Mark looked at Sandra apologetically. Sandra laughed it off graciously. They'll warm up. Children always do. But Cassie, standing quietly near the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands, watched Sandra's eyes at that moment. And what she saw there, just for a second before Sandra blinked it away, was something Cassie couldn't quite name yet. The first week Sandra moved in, she was careful and jovial. She laughed at the right moments, touched Mark's hand at dinner, asked Cassie questions about the house with the tone of someone genuinely curious. But Cassie noticed the pattern quickly. Sandra only performed warmth when Mark was in the room. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, the temperature in that house dropped to 0 heat degree. The chaos first started at breakfast. Cassie had prepared the twins' usual morning meal. Soft scrambled eggs, sliced fruit, warm oats with honey. Stephanie and Stephen were already at the table, kicking their feet under their chairs, arguing about whose drawing was better. The kitchen smelled like butter and cinnamon. Sandra walked in, looked at the table and stopped. "What is this?" Her voice wasn't loud but terrifying. Cassie turned from the stove. "Good morning, Miss Sandra. Breakfast is ready, the twins prefer." "I didn't ask what they prefer." Sandra picked up the bowl of oats and set it aside like it was something she found on the floor. "Sugar. Processed honey. Do you know what this does to a child's system?" Cassie kept her voice even. "They've eaten this every morning since they were 2. It's a balanced diet with other nutrients. Cassie tried to defend herself, but Sandra quickly shunned her off. "It's unhealthy, Cassie." Sandra cut her off cleanly. "From today I'll be deciding what they eat. You cook what I tell you to cook." Stephen looked up from his drawing. His eyes moved to Cassie's face, reading not her mind but her expression, the way she held her jaw tight, the way her hand stayed still even though everything in her wanted to react back and put Sandra back in her place. "Cass made our food." Stephanie said it simply, like a fact that didn't need defending. Sandra turned, giving her a fake smile that looked warm. "And now I'm making decisions about your food, sweetheart. Because that's what mothers do," she said. The word landed wrong. Stephanie felt it. Stephen felt it too. "You're not our mother." Stephanie's voice was firm. The smile on Sandra's face didn't disappear. It just tightened, trying to maintain her composure. Cassie stepped forward before the moment could break further. "I'll prepare something different for this morning. It's no problem." She reached for the bowl Sandra had moved aside, her movements calm, her face giving nothing away. And that was when Sandra's hand came across her face. Not a push, not a grab. A full open palm slap, sharp and sudden, that snapped Cassie's head sideways and sent the bowl clattering to the floor. The kitchen went absolutely silent. Stephanie was on her feet before the echo died. "Don't touch her." Her small voice hit every wall in that room. Stephen stood too, his face doing something it had never done before, hardening. At 4 years old, his eyes were cold and filled with rage. Sandra straightened her robe, completely composed. "Learn your place." She said it to Cassie. Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen like nothing had happened. Stephanie ran to Cassie immediately, wrapping both arms around her waist, pressing her face into her side. "Did it hurt? Cass, did it hurt?" she asked softly. Cassie crouched down, held both twins firmly, and looked at them with steady eyes. "I'm fine." Her voice didn't shake. "I'm completely fine." But her cheek burned, and something behind her eyes burned worse. When Mark came home that evening, Sandra was soft and lovely at the dinner table, refilling his glass, laughing at his jokes, touching his shoulder. The twins sat across from them, quiet in a way that wasn't peace. It was protest. They ate without speaking, without looking at Sandra once. Later, Mark knocked on Stephanie's door. She was sitting on her bed, Stephen beside her, both of them still. "Talk to me. Did something happen? You both have been awfully quiet since dinner?" Mark asked. "She hit Cassie Das." Stephanie looked at him directly. "This morning. In the kitchen. She slapped her, Dad." Mark's expression shifted. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did Cassie say that?" "We were there. We saw it." He exhaled, rubbed his face. "All right, darling, I'll speak to Sandra." He said it the way adults say things they mean to do but don't fully believe they need doing. Stephen finally spoke, his voice low. "She doesn't love us, Dad. She doesn't even like us." "Stephen, we know what people think." His eyes met his father's. "We always know." Mark looked at his son for a long moment. Then he kissed both their foreheads, turned off the light, and closed the door behind him. In the dark, Stephanie whispered to her brother. "He's not going to listen to us." "Not yet," Stephen whispered back. "But he will." What the twins already knew, and what Cassie was only beginning to piece together, was that Sandra's thoughts had shifted into something darker. She wasn't just jealous of Cassie's bond with the children. She was threatened by it. Every time Mark's eyes softened watching Cassie with the twins, Sandra felt it like a needle. Every time Stephanie ran to Cassie instead of her, the anger grew a layer thicker. One afternoon while Cassie was folding laundry outside the master bedroom, she heard Sandra on the phone. Voice low, deliberate. The kids are the problem. If it weren't for them and that maid, he'd already be completely mine. Cassie's hands stopped moving. I just need one clean opportunity. One moment where everything points to her. Cassie stood completely still in that hallway, the folded shirt in her hands, her heart filled with genuine fear. Not for herself, but for Stephanie and Steven. The twins' birthday was in 5 days. That same night, while the house slept, 2 4-year-olds sat on the kitchen floor with a small camera Steven had pulled from Mark's old travel bag. Stephanie held the instruction sheet, pretending she could read every word. Here. Steven pointed to the corner cabinet above the sink. She'll never look there. That's a perfect blind spot. Stephanie nodded. We have to get her, Steven. We have to show Dad what she is. They worked quietly, carefully. 2 small children setting a trap that an adult hadn't thought to set. When the camera was in place, Stephanie sat back and looked at her brother. Now we wait. The birthday party was everything a 4-year-old child could dream of. Balloons in every corner. A long table dressed in white and gold. Guests filling the hall, Mark's colleagues, family, friends, neighbors, all of them laughing, taking pictures, lifting glasses. Stephanie and Steven sat at the center of it in their outfits. Steven in a tiny navy suit. Stephanie in a white dress with gold ribbons in her hair. Cassie had been in the kitchen since 5 that morning. The cake was 3 tiers, vanilla and strawberry, the twins' favorite. Decorated with hand-placed flowers and their names written carefully across the top. She had poured every love she had into it. Every detail was love made visible. Sandra stood near Mark, dressed impeccably, playing the role of gracious hostess with quiet perfection. She touched his arm often. She smiled at every guest. She was so convincing that even Cassie, watching from the edge of the room, almost doubted what she had heard in that hallway 5 days ago. When the time came to cut the cake, Mark called the twins forward. The crowd gathered. Someone dimmed the lights. Candles were lit. Everyone began to sing the birthday song. And then Stephanie stepped back. Stop. Her voice cut clean through the singing. Don't touch that cake, Dad. The music died. The room stilled. Every face turned toward the little girl standing with her arms stretched wide. Her eyes burning with something too fierce for a 4-year-old's face. Dad. Her voice dropped. That cake is poisoned by her. She pointed at Sandra. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Sandra pressed her hand to her chest and looked around at the guests with wide, wounded eyes. I don't understand. Cassie baked that cake. She was alone in that kitchen all morning. She turned to Mark, her voice dropping just enough to sound like concern rather than accusation. Sweetheart, I don't want to believe it, but she was the only one in there. Every head turned toward Cassie. Cassie stood completely still, her face open, her hands at her sides. She didn't defend herself, not yet. She just looked at the twins. Steven stepped forward. We knew she would say that. Stephanie reached into the small pocket of her white dress and pulled out her brother's hand. We put a camera in the kitchen just 1 day ago. It recorded everything. Mark's eyes moved between his children and Sandra, then back to his children. Show me. His voice was firm. They moved to the kitchen, Mark, the twins, Sandra, Cassie, and half the guests trailing behind in stunned silence. Steven climbed onto the counter with Cassie's help and retrieved the small camera from behind the cabinet above the sink. Mark connected it to the kitchen screen with hands that were perfectly steady. The footage was clear. Sandra, alone in the kitchen, 20 minutes before the party started. She moved to the cake with something small in her hand, a folded paper, a tiny vial, glanced once at the door, then leaned over the top tier and pressed something into the cake. Mark watched it twice. The second time, his jaw tightened so slowly it was almost invisible. Then he turned and looked at Sandra with eyes that had gone completely cold. Mark! Sandra stepped forward, her voice shifting immediately into something soft and desperate. It wasn't what it looks like. I just wanted the children to be sick enough to need me, to finally let me in. I just wanted them to choose me. His hand came across her face before she finished the sentence. A very harsh slap. Get out of my house. If you come near my children again, I will make sure you regret every decision that led you to this moment. He straightened, looked at his security. One gesture was enough for them to act. Sandra was removed, still reaching back, still talking. Her voice swallowed by the closing of the front door. A new cake arrived within the hour. The party continued. But something had permanently shifted in that house, and everyone in that room felt it. Stephanie sat in Cassie's lap for the rest of the evening, cake on her chin, completely unbothered. Stephen fell asleep against Cassie's arm before the night was over. Mark sat across from them watching for the first time in a long time. The next morning was quiet. Cassie returned from dropping the twins at school to find Mark still home, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea already poured. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a sit with me, Cassie," he said in a calm tone. She sat gently. He was quiet for a moment, still wasn't sure how to begin. "You have been in this house for 4 years. He looked at his cup. "You raised my children. You protected them when I couldn't see what was right in front of me." He looked up. "I see it now, Cassie. I see all of the love." Cassie said nothing. She waited for him to finish talking. "My children don't need a title in this house." His voice was careful, deliberate. "They need you. Specifically just you." He paused. "And I think I've needed you too. Longer than I've been willing to admit." Cassie's breath shifted. Something she had folded away quietly for 4 years, tucked beneath duty and routine and the understanding of her place, began slowly to unfold. "I'm not asking you to be their maid anymore." Mark's eyes held hers. "I'm asking you to be my partner. To build this family properly with me." The kitchen was completely still. "Are you sure about this?" Cassie asked. Mark nodded. "Then yes." Cassie said it simply. What followed was a season that Cassie hadn't known she was allowed to want. Mark took her shopping. Not for uniforms but for dresses that made her laugh at herself in the mirror, shoes she called ridiculous and wore anyway. He took her to dinner in quiet restaurants where he leaned across the table to hear her better. He took the twins on weekend outings to the parks, to the bookshops, ice cream places, and watched how naturally she moved through all of it, how the children orbited her like she was their son. He already knew what he wanted to do. He just wanted to do it right. He chose a Sunday evening. The living room was filled with red roses, and candles covered every surface. And across the back wall, in letters that Stephen had helped him tape up crookedly the night before, "Will you marry me?" Cassie walked in from the hallway and stopped. Stephanie and Stephen were sitting on the couch, practically vibrating. Mark was already on one knee. "Cassie." His voice was steady but his eyes gave everything away. "You walked into this house and you gave my children a home inside it. You gave me back something I thought grief had taken permanently." He opened the box. "I don't want to spend another season of my life without you in it. Not as staff, not as a guest, but as my beloved wife." Cassie pressed both hands over her mouth. Her eyes filled with the overwhelming weight of a moment she had never let herself imagine arriving. "Yes." She laughed through it, the word breaking open warm and certain. "Yes, Mark. I will marry you," she said. Stephanie launched herself off the couch screaming. Stephen punched the air twice, completely seriously, then ran into the middle of them and held on. The wedding was small and beautiful. Just the people who mattered, soft music, and Cassie walking toward Mark in a dress the color of cream, the twins on either side of her holding her hands all the way to the altar. Months later, on a quiet morning, Cassie, with her 2 months pregnant baby bump, stood in the kitchen stirring a pot while Stephanie and Stephen sat on the counter beside her. Technically not allowed on the counter, entirely tolerated anyway. "I want a sister," Stephanie announced, kicking her feet. "A brother," Stephen said immediately, without looking up from his drawing. "Sister. Brother."
Stephanie and Stephen. Cassie's voice tugged with warmth. "The baby will be whatever the baby is." Stephanie leaned over and pressed her ear to Cassie's stomach with complete seriousness. Stephen watched her. "Well?" he asked. Stephanie sat up, looked at her brother. "I still think sister." Stephen rolled his eyes playfully. Cassie laughed softly. "And honestly, this is my own thought about this story. Kids naturally have a spirit that attracts them to adults, and if you have a clean spirit they will get more attracted to you. You can't force people to love you, you have to go where you are valued. And you don't have to commit a crime or try to defame someone just so you can buy the love of another. If it gets to a point where you have to tarnish another person's good image to get loved, then you are not on the right track of life. You need to retrace your steps." I want you to drop your comments and show your thoughts with me in a comment section about this story. Which scene got you the most? What part do you love in the story? I want to hear your thoughts, and please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, because I have more engaging stories I love to share with you. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I will see you in the next story. Bye for now.